And I am wearing my mask just to remind everybody to wear your mask when you're out in public, although right now there is only a city recorder and a city manager, and they're both about 25 feet away. So for this meeting, I'm going to take my mask off, and I'm going to ask the city recorder to do a roll call so that people who may not be watching but may be listening can hear what's going on, know who's here. Go ahead, Karen.
Mayor McCardle.
Here.
Shannon Core.
Here.
Michael Hicks.
Here.
Kathy Martin Willis.
Here.
Marilyn Morton.
Here.
Jennifer Renstrom Smith.
Here.
Tom Takis.
Here.
Okay. Council members, we have a full agenda tonight, so we're going to move promptly forward. You have the minutes of the May 26th meeting in front of you, and do they meet with your approval?
I move to approve.
I move to approve the minutes as received.
I heard from Councilor Takis first, and then Marilyn Morton was also moving, so I think that was the second. Is there any objection? There you go. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, I
Aye.
hear no. Come again? Oh, that was a late aye? Okay, I didn't hear any opposition. Okay, thank you. Minutes are approved. Getting used to doing this on them. Under visitor comments, we have Jim Wixon, who would like to speak to us. Mr. Wixon, I know you're out in the outside area, and I think you can hear me, so come on in, please. We're sending somebody to get him. So council members, while we're doing that, and for people listening, we have adjusted the agenda a little bit today. We've moved things around in a little bit of a different order so that we can get some reports and presentations up early. Okay, our visitor comment, he stepped away, and so when he comes back, we'll work him back in when he gets here. As I was just saying, council members, we're going to juggle the agenda today and put some reports and presentations right away, because I know that there is lots to share with people today, and then we'll continue on to some of the action items a little later as we move through the meeting. So we're going to have our first day presentation report by Sean Irvine and Ramon Martinez on the engagement and inclusion and independence, and I invite them to speak to us. Mr. Irvine, and Ramon.
Okay, can you hear me?
Just fine.
Excellent. I'm going to start while Ramon comes up to the podium here. So Mayor, Council, appreciate the opportunity here to talk with you tonight. So, Council made it a priority several years ago to build stronger relationships and communication pathways within the Latino community here in Independence. We had several, as you recall, we had several interim positions in the role, and it worked well enough that we transitioned into a full-time position a few years ago. And I think we're really starting to see the benefits of that now. Really, overall, the goal of Ramon's work is to build relationships and communicate without really a specific ask or need. Because really good trusting relationships, they take time and individual effort. And that's really what Ramon's been up to. He's been creating touch points within the community when we need to know what people are thinking, or, kind of how to get, we need to get information out about something. We know we have those places that we can go to. Really, that means building a lot of individual relationships, like at St. Patrick's Church within the school district. He created a Spanish Facebook page for bilingual announcements, just really getting involved in a lot of variety of activities. And I think importantly, he's also been participating in several regional groups and associations. That helps him learn best practices and really extends our network of relationships to bring new resources and opportunities to the community. There's a couple of different funding programs that have sprung up, regional or statewide funding programs to help at-risk populations, farm workers, populations that could potentially or programs that could potentially serve our some people in our community. And Ramon's making sure that our residents get connected to those resources. A project that was already underway, but I think is even more timely now, is he's been working with Capaces to bring their People's Representative program to Independence. It's a 2-year program that teaches community leadership. You know, whether you want to be on the neighborhood commission or whether you want to be a state representative, it kind of helps work with the Latino population to train those skills. So he's also, you know, like I said, we've been seeing the fruits of that labor with the current COVID crisis. And so I want to introduce Ramon Martinez, who's our community engagement manager. And he's going to tell you a little bit about a couple of specific initiatives that he's been working on lately. So Ramon, your turn.
Do we hold for a second? Do we have sound there, please? We're checking for sound. And because I can hear you on here in the room, but I'm making sure that that it goes out over the broadcast channel. So we're making sure that Mr. Martinez can be heard. And we're making sure we're working on that. Karen?
I'm trying to find.
There you go. You've got sound now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Martinez, and good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to this setting that we're all in. We're all, one initiative that we off was a weekly updates meeting. Initially started with the intention of sharing updates from the city regarding COVID, but slowly it has evolved, and it's now become this platform that we use to share updates, and not just from the city, but we also bring special guests who basically these special guests are in line with the interests and concerns from our participants. So we've had an array of community members come out from the school district. Sean joined us once for sharing a resource for local business owners. We had a Polk County Health Department join us, and in just the fact that we're having this Zoom platform, it's also enabled us to invite guests from other parts of the state that it's in a normal situation it's not quite feasible. So it's been great because just really this platform has allowed us to create community in a digital environment. And ultimately, it's also allowed me to connect with more people in the community, and also it's opened other doors for me and from communications trainings, and also allowed me to create more connections and bring back to our community resources and whatnot.
So yeah, I think this is a really helpful tool. You know, a lot of it's about listening, just going to the community and hearing what they're concerned about and responding to that. I want to offer a real quick example. So through this Zoom meeting, we became aware of a COVID case within a local low-income housing development. So Ramon put out a call to the community for face mask donations, and then worked with the participants of that Zoom call to organize a timely delivery of that personal protective equipment to protect the residents within that housing development. I think that was just a real good example of just, you know, the usefulness of this in a grassroots responsive way.
Yeah, and that was kind of our foot in the door. And from that, we were able to link or join forces with Mano a Mano in their weekly food distributions. So it was just great to really being able to, really being able to, that whole quote of, many hands make the load lighter. So that was kind of the case in our community. And so, and then also when we're out and about every week, we're not just going to one location and just saying it's not just a one stop. We're basically, when we're out in the community, we're kind of giving these subtle reminders of getting folks to recognize the importance of wearing a mask, and and also in nearby too, regarding PPE, there was a recent opportunity for us to go to the fairgrounds where we were able to get a massive load of masks, approximately 1,000. And also, along with that, we had hand sanitizer. So I was able to go to local farms and make sure that that got distributed.
Yeah, and I think with the distribution of the personal protective equipment is really, I think, important. I know he's been also, after this original response with this one case, he's now been continuing to work with Oregon Childhood Development Coalition, even though they don't have any active cases, but making sure that they have the equipment they need to protect themselves and their people. And this is just a good example of how this work is. It's helping to protect our community and our residents, but it's also really about building relationships and establishing these trusted connections that are going to continue to pay off down the road.
Oh. And then from that, we were just, we kind of kept the momentum going, and we had there was a story that came out of Central California where basically community came together and supported their local farm workers. And so I was able to connect with one of our partners from Northwest Family Services, and we kind of chatted the idea, and then we basically I connected with Luz, and Luz, she instantly jumped on board with the whole idea of really being able to help the farm workers in our community, because the reality was a lot of people are not going to work and working remotely or whatever it might be. But in the case of local farm workers, it's business, it's a work day. It's the working continued. And so we wanted to come up with a way to thank our local farm workers, and Los Primos came up. They were instantly on board. They stepped up to the plate, and I want to invite Luz Prado, one of the owners of Los Primos, to talk a little bit about the effort.
Good evening. So, as a local business owner, so we are happy to partner with my two brothers, Alvaro and Jesus and Ramon, and recognize our farmer workers and the important contributions they make to help feed us and the community. Thank you so much. This is just the beginning. God bless you. And I just want to share my personal experience with this. So I'm so very happy to see that people, when they smile and when they ask, why you do this for us? And I say, because we recognize your hard work, and that's why we are here. And the community, it's had a good answer for us, because we receive a lot money from the people. So they pay like the 300, 200, or they give some money to give this, to make this project and give burritos for the people in the field. So they're very happy, and they say, thank you, you guys, for this do for day.
Well, thank you. And I want to share some things, and because you are modest, and for council members and those listening in, let me tell you a little bit about Los Primos. It's a gathering place for the entire community, but particularly for the Latino population. As has been mentioned previously, they're very active in their own supporting community members in need, and they become an important communication point for the City of Independence and everybody who wants to get information out. Los Primos helps us distribute flyers and information. It was a key partner in the 2040 vision process for our community. They hosted an information table, they distributed surveys, and participated in our advisory committee. You heard a little bit about the lunch program, but basically they helped set up a program where a $5 donation buys a lunch for a farm worker. They raised the money, made the meals, and delivered them on site to farms around the area, pretty much just at cost. So far, they've delivered about 400 meals. They're creative and always up for partnerships that help the total community. As an extended family, they run the place. The brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, everybody gets involved. This is a great example of how valuable local businesses can be to the community. So I'm pleased to say, as the mayor of Independence, I get to present a Good Neighbor Award. The City of Independence, the official wording on this goes, the City of Independence would like to present the Good Neighbor Award to Los Primos. Besides providing some of the most delicious food around, they genuinely care about the community. You get treated like family, and it shows, as everyone who walks through the door is greeted with a cheerful, hola! They are part of the fabric of our community, and it's a pleasure to present this award to the Los Primos team. what I'm going to do now is I'm going to step out from behind the podium and I'm going to present Luz with the social distancing rules that we have. I'm going to present that award to her, and then we will all have a virtual clapping motion. So I'm going to step out away and do that right now. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. We're glad you're in the community. This is a small token of our appreciation, and thank you. So I'll give you a big giant hug if we were able to at this point. Okay, thank you. Appropriate claps from everybody. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get myself hooked up back here again. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ramon. Okay. The next item on our agenda this evening, you know, we're all aware of what's been going on around the country, what's happened in some cities, some abhorrent actions that have taken, and there are a number of people in the community, our council, our citizens, and others in the region who are interested. Well, what are the impacts in our community? What are our policies? What are our rules? How do our police work with our community? And so we wanted to make sure that we got firsthand information. And so the city manager and I decided to add this to today's agenda. So I'm going to ask our police chief, Bob Mason, to share some information with us. And the counselors, if you have questions, there'll be an opportunity to do that as we go. So Chief Mason, I turn the time to you. Good evening, Chief, and welcome to council.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and good evening to citizens that have expressed an interest into the practices and policies of your police departments. For those of you that don't know me and are joining us online, my name is Bob Mason, and I am the police chief in Independence. The Independence Police Department strives to be an outward-facing, transparent agency that partners with our community to enhance livability. Independence has not always been the welcoming and inclusive community that I have come to love while serving here for the past 28 years. I have seen great progress made to be more welcoming and inclusive during my career here, not just in the city as a whole, but specifically with the police department. But that is not to say that we cannot do better. The officers that serve you in this community do so with care, concern, and compassion. We strive to do our best and to serve with dignity and integrity. But no one is perfect and mistakes will be made. It is in those times that the relationships that exist and the bonds that we have made carry us through. While none of the officers serving Independence participated in the events that precipitated the national response we've observed this past week, that does not mean that we don't feel the pressure of serving as a police officer in today's environment, even here in Independence. I would like to thank those that have reached out to offer support. The words and acts of solidarity from this community have truly made a difference. We must, as an agency, a city, and a community, continue to look for ways to improve because we can always get better. We cannot settle. It simply is not an option. We must analyze what we're doing, why we're doing it, and now, more than ever, we must make that analysis with an emphasis on how it affects those we are doing it to. Over the past week, many people have contacted the city and the police department, the mayor and city councilors, requesting information about our policies and practices. I thought for the benefit of all who have asked questions, I would provide council with a few of the things we have done or will do to continue to best serve this community and outline the specific policies included in the requests. I have put together a PowerPoint for reference that will be available for viewing and further analysis on our webpage. Let me share my screen so we can get started. Mr. Mayor, can you see my screen?
I can't see your screen at this. There it is, City Council presentation. Yes, I can now see it.
Excellent. So I'd like to start off this presentation by explaining our body camera program. We've been wearing body cameras since I was appointed as police chief in 2014. During the time since that started, we've expanded our program to include cameras mounted in our cars, as well as in our interview rooms and in the secure areas of the police department. Next, I'd like to talk about accreditation. What is accreditation? Accreditation is an outside look into our department policies and practices by someone not affiliated with our department. Accreditation confirms that we are meeting the 104 professional standards of accountability, management, and operations required for the award. Accreditation validates adherence to our own policies through proofs and offers a path to agency improvement if we're found to be deficient. The Independence Police Department was accredited for the first time in April of 2015, and we were reaccredited in 2018. And last, I'd like to explain Lexipol and what that is. Lexipol is a subscription service that provides fully developed state-specific policies, researched and written by subject matter experts and vetted by attorneys. Their policies are based on nationwide standards and best practices while also incorporating state and federal laws and regulations where appropriate. When looking at our policies in the online format, which you have to be a Lexipol member and logged in to see, and we will do that this evening, provides information giving further detail on where the policy requirements are derived. When looking at our policies, you will see state, federal, best practice, modified, or agency content called out in a box just under the heading of the specific policy. This indicates where the mandate for that specific policy language may have come from. Let's take a look at some policy review. So we received questions from community members about what our policy and practices are in 8 different areas. These 8 areas are a campaign of policy recommendation that is really circling the internet right now. And I want to walk through these 8 areas one at a time. So the first is to ban chokeholds and strangleholds with the statement that allowing officers to choke or strangle civilians in many cases where less lethal force could be used instead results in the unnecessary death or serious injury of civilians. Last week, our policy allowed the use of the carotid hold if the officer had successfully completed approved training in the use and application of the carotid hold. This policy was part of the best practice policy provided by Lexipol. Since I've been police chief, we have never provided that required training, so no one was authorized to, nor has anyone used the technique. As a reform to our policy, our newly adopted use of force policy, as of yesterday, limits the use of the carotid restraint to be used only in situations where deadly force is authorized. Here is our new policy.
Chief Mason, sorry to interrupt. Do you want us to save all of our questions till the end or ask them when they come up?
I think if you save them to the end, we'll probably be better off because some
Okay.
of them may get answered through other policy review on our way.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Chief. Thank you for the question, Councilor Ransom Smith.
So here's our new policy, which clearly limits the use of the carotid control hold to situations that justify deadly force application. Policy recommendation number 2 is to require de-escalation. Sorry, I hit the wrong button, I think. As part of my response to de-escalation, I would like to point out that at the Independence Police Department, all full-time officers have been to a 40-hour crisis intervention training. This training focuses on de-escalation, and this training includes scenarios for officers to practice skills. Our county has 2 crisis intervention teams that respond to our jurisdiction when available to assist on calls of people in crisis. The 2-person teams include a specially trained officer or deputy working alongside a qualified mental health professional. And our new TASER contract that this council recently approved includes virtual reality-based mental health crisis and de-escalation training that we will be implementing in the coming months for all of our officers. Our de-escalation policy can be found in our crisis intervention policy and is based on Lexipol best practices. And that's where you can see an example of how further information is available. There, if you look under 434.6, you'll see a box that says best practice in it. This policy specifically says members should be patient, polite, calm, courteous, speak and move slowly, and demonstrate active listening skills, among other requirements. Policy recommendation number 3 is to require warning before shooting, with the statement that officers should give a verbal warning when possible before shooting at a civilian. This language can be found in our policy 300.4, deadly force applications, which is written based on federal requirements. Section 300.4 specifically states that a verbal warning should precede the use of deadly force where feasible. Policy recommendation number 4 is requires exhaust all alternatives before shooting, with the statement that it should require officers to exhaust all other reasonable means before resorting to deadly force. Our policy does not use this specific wording, but rather utilizes the objective reasonableness standard, which I will speak to later in the presentation. Wording in our policy that supports this recommendation can be found in the first paragraph of policy 300.3, use of force, which specifically states officers shall use only that amount of force that reasonably appears necessary given the facts and circumstances perceived by the officer at the time. Policy recommendation number 5 is duty to intervene, with the statement, require officers to intervene and stop excessive force used by other officers and report these incidents immediately to a supervisor. Our policy 300.2.1, titled Duty to Intercede, is based on federal requirements. And this policy specifically states that an officer observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond that which is objectively reasonable under the circumstances shall, when in a position to do so, intercede to prevent the use of unreasonable force. Later in this same policy, it states the officer should promptly report these observations to a supervisor. Policy recommendation number 6 is ban shooting at moving vehicles, with the statement restrict officers from shooting at moving vehicles, which is regarded as particularly dangerous and ineffective tactic. Our specific policy is 300.4.1, and it is titled shooting at or from moving vehicles. It is best practice that we have modified. This policy clearly limits shooting at a moving vehicle or shooting from a moving vehicle to a deadly force application in which no other reasonable means are available to avert the threat of the vehicle. Policy recommendation number 7 is to require use of force continuum, with the statement, develop a force continuum that limits the types of force and or weapons that can be used to respond to specific types of resistance. Independence Police Department does not use a force continuum, but instead subscribes to the objectively reasonable standard, which is derived from the Constitution of the United States and continually updated through court decisions. Continuum models were developed decades ago when courts provided little guidance on use of force. Our objectively reasonable standard fulfills the desired result of limit the type of force and or weapons that can be used to respond to specific types of resistance by requiring all actions be reasonable. Our policy outlines the factors used to determine reasonableness of force. Reasonableness factors are derived directly from guidance that has been provided through the courts. And we're going to dive into this a little deeper in this policy because this one is a little bit, I can't just say, yes, we have one, because we have had one in the past, a continuum, but those really are not an industry standard any longer. So as we go into it, you will see our policy 300.3 is titled Use of Force, and it's written based on federal requirements. It specifically states that officers shall use only the amount of force that reasonably appears necessary given the facts and circumstances perceived by the officer at the time of the event. How reasonableness is determined is guided by a number of factors that should be taken into consideration. Our policy outlines 17 factors. Some are Graham factors, what they're referred to as, and those are given to us from the United States Supreme Court in a case titled Graham versus Connor, which set the standard that all use of force cases be evaluated under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which governs search and seizure, even though they're use of force cases. And that standard is whether the seizure was reasonable because they consider using force against a person, seizing the person. Other factors since that case have come to us through cases heard, and many of those came to us by our Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. To determine whether the use of force was objectively reasonable, the court balances the nature and quality of the intrusion on the individual's Fourth Amendment interests against the countervailing governmental interests at stake. The strength of the government's interest is measured by examining the Graham factors. Our policy includes additional factors given to us since the Graham decision, which is why we have 17. The original Graham factors, there weren't nearly that many, but earlier I said we don't have a continuum because we are ever evolving in use of force and what is considered reasonable and what is not. And as our courts continue to give us more guidance, it changes our policy by putting different factors in as to what is or is not reasonable. And policy recommendation number 8 is to require comprehensive reporting with the statement, require officers to report each time they use force or threaten to use force against civilians. Reporting requirements can be found weaved throughout our policy manual. I have highlighted 4 areas that require reporting regarding use of force. In the interest of time, we'll only look at the first one because it captures everything they asked, but just know it's in our policy manual many places. The first one is reporting the use of force. Within the use of force policy 300.5, reporting the use of force is written as a best practice and has been modified. This policy requires the prompt written reporting of any use of or observation of force used by a member of this department. It further requires reporting anytime a member points a weapon or control device at a person. I know this was a lot and I apologize for overwhelming you with PowerPoint. I will tell you that our policy manual is a living document and it gets upgraded and changed regularly. The benefit of us having Lexipol is that they have a team of attorneys and policy writers that are always looking for changes that changes in law, changes in court decisions that in turn change our policy or the requirements of our policies. And they send those updates to us. We then have to go through them, determine whether or not they need any modifications to fit our specific application here in Independence, and then accept those, roll them out to all of the officers so that they can get the upgraded version. And that happens regularly to keep our policy manual updated. I also recognize I might not have answered all of the questions that people may have, and I welcome additional questions. I would ask that you contact me, emails preferred, with those questions, and I will get you answers.
So I know some council members have some questions that they'd like to ask, and I think Councilor Ransom Smith, you have a question to begin, and go ahead.
I do. Sorry, I actually have two. So I just wanted to check on the carotid hold policy. It was originally only if they'd had training. Now it's in a deadly force situation. Is it on top of having training or just the deadly force situation?
Now it is only allowed in a deadly force situation.
Regardless if they've been trained or not.
Correct. So
Okay.
Previously, had you received the proper training, had we provided the proper training, which again, we never have, then that particular technique could have been used in a less than deadly force situation in order to kind of clean that up so that the next chief won't be able to just have that. That's kind of what I was thinking. Policy already in place, they would now have to make a change to policy to allow it because it isn't allowed except for deadly force.
So will the officers be getting trained on how to do it in the event of a deadly force situation? It seems like it went from no one could do it to now anyone can do it if it's deadly force, or maybe I'm just not seeing something.
Right. So part of use of force policy and procedures in the training aspect is that when deadly force is authorized, you are expected to use the least amount of force as is possible. Okay. So in that case, I'm going to use the carotid hold as an example, and I'm going to put a little scenario together for you in my head right now, and maybe that will help. So let's say that the worst has happened and I am on the ground and I have someone on top of me that is assaulting me to the point that I'm unconscious, and a small officer arrives and runs up and says, get off of him, hits him a couple times with his hands, tries a knee strike, nothing's happening, he's still just hitting me. At that moment, deadly force is authorized. Deadly force is authorized to protect me, right, from the person that's assaulting me. And the officer has some options. A firearm would be an option, and the results of that would be pretty clear that it would be a high risk for the person that's having it used against them. The carotid, or just grabbing the person by the neck and pulling them off of me, would probably be a choice that officer would consider prior to pulling out a gun and shooting that officer. Does that make sense?
No, I get that, and it totally makes sense to me. I just feel like
Can I rephrase
they're
it?
trained to use a gun, and so I mean I understand. We don't have to belabor it because I have another question and I don't want to take everyone's time up. So
I could
go ahead.
Rephrase it. Prior to the change in policy in a deadly force situation, were any officer able to use the carotid artery hold without receiving training? I believe that was kind of the question, right?
I don't think that helped me understand. I'm sorry.
So prior to this change in policy, if someone hadn't received the training and they were in a deadly force situation, could they use the carotid hold there?
Absolutely, yes. When they were in a deadly force situation, then they the way the courts have said it as the implement delivery system is of no significance, meaning if the example they often give in academy trainings is if you are justified to use your firearm to stop a threat, you are also justified to use your car to stop that threat if it is going to be a safer action or a more reasonable action. We wouldn't normally train or encourage officers to, hit people with their car, right? But just because they haven't been trained to do it, if it becomes a reasonable act based on the totality of those circumstances, then it, as the courts have found, is of no significance.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sorry, I had
You may
one
go-
more.
Go ahead.
Sorry. You talked about mental health training and de-escalating situations. Is any of that culturally specific or specific to people of color? I recognize the population in our community, but we have visitors often. How much training is the police department receiving in that?
So I have been through the class and I do not recall specific cultural components to that. The only specific components that I recall being different were veterans and the higher risk for veterans being in crisis and how to respond specifically to them. As far as cultural diversity training, it is an annual requirement that our department has cultural diversity training. It is done every year, and it's also weaved into other components of training, but I cannot say whether or not it was in that 40-hour course. That I'm not certain of that.
Counselor Morton, please.
Yes, Chief, during the time that you've been with the department here, without naming names or pulling up dates, have there ever been any incidents of use of excessive force that had to be dealt with?
No.
Counselor Kaur.
Chief, I appreciate the presentation. The only question that comes to my mind is the definition of reasonableness. And I understand that you have various definitions that you refer to and they change over time. But my question is more of a personal nature. As you as a police chief, what kind of conversations do you have with your officers regarding reasonableness? Because I assume the officer who put a knee on Mr. Floyd's neck is going to argue that that was reasonable.
A good question. Thank you for the question. So I would say that most of our conversations are more based in training. We do a lot of training. Most of our training is skills related. So we have confrontational simulation training where our officers are put into scenarios. Sometimes they are computer generated scenarios where they have different tools available to them to respond to scenarios that branch based upon the response that those officers give. During those trainings, which I provide many of those trainings because I am a trainer, conversations are had about what is and isn't reasonable. If there are any cases that come up in the news, which there often are, those conversations are had then as well. It is not uncommon for the shift that's working to have a roll call, and I'll call it a conversation because it really wasn't a sanctioned training, but we'll watch a video, we'll replay something that happened on the news and talk through other options and whether or not we agreed with the option that that officer took. Some call it armchair quarterbacking. We call it, staying current on practices, and you have to really run these things through in your mind frequently in order to have the best answer when you need it in a split second, because these situations are quickly evolving. And if you haven't thought through what you would do in what circumstances a lot prior to needing to make that split second decision, your decision making isn't as good.
Thank you, Chief.
I have one more, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Counselor.
We talked about body cameras when we did the contract, but do the in-car cameras automatically turn on when you guys are checked into a call, or do those have to be manually activated as well?
So those have triggers on them that when you turn your lights on, it starts a recording on the car camera. You can also override that and start it if you didn't have your lights on. So like sometimes someone will sit and watch an intersection, like say a stoplight. We have a couple stoplight intersections, and they'll turn that camera on so that it captures the violation that they may then take action on. But generally, it's when they turn their lights on that camera comes on.
And do we have any other triggers, like, vehicle over 100 miles an hour, or like running, jogging, anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No, we are looking into, so with the new contract that we haven't implemented those new devices yet. They are mostly here in the building. We are just working through some of the IT parts of that. We are looking at some new triggers that are available that may include, I think it will include, when you activate your lights, your body camera will actually come on, not just your car camera. And currently that isn't the case. The officers have to activate and deactivate that camera pretty much manually. And there are, again, policies that govern that they're supposed to have that camera on much of the time. The concern there is that something happens so quickly and evolves so fast that they never got the opportunity to activate it.
That was my question, because I know there are so many different triggers. So I wasn't sure what we had set up as far as like body movement and that stuff. Thank you.
Yes.
Counselor Kaur, I think you had another question.
No, I didn't. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Are there other questions from council? I have a couple of questions, Chief, if you might. Could you share with us a little bit about the makeup of your department, age, culture, sex, just for anybody who's listening, so they get a bit of a flavor of who is the Independence Police Department?
I will try from memory here. So we have 2 females. We have the rest are males. There are 15 of us total. We have 3 veterans. We have 2 males that I will identify as of Latino descent. I believe we have 7 bilingual officers that speak Spanish as well as English. And we have a lot of other things. I wish I'd have predicted that question, because we are very diverse in many ways with the backgrounds and other attributes.
Okay, thank you. And I have a secondary question, second question, because I remember when the accreditation was announced. If my memory is correct, there aren't a ton of places that have accredited police department. Do I remember that? Talk a little bit about that, please.
You are correct. Not all agencies are accredited. In Polk County, the Sheriff's Office and Independence and the City of Salem, I'm not sure they're current, but they have been in the past. If they're not current right now, are the only, let me take that back. Grand Ron is very, very close. If they haven't done it, they are working toward accreditation as well. I would have to do an internet search to tell you how many agencies in Oregon are. I want to say it's in the 40s number that are accredited in Oregon.
Thank you. Councilor Kaur, I see your hand
Yeah.
again. Go ahead.
I have a follow-on to what you said. Chief, of your police force, your current police force, how many of them are homegrown here, or how many have come from other agencies?
Again, difficult to answer on the fly. Coming from other agencies, not very many. Most, this is their first full-time law enforcement job. Many came from us from other careers. We have fence builders, we have welders, manufacturers, fabricators, all kinds of different careers before law enforcement. But most of our officers came through our ranks as reserves or cadets, learned our kind of our culture and our ways, and then found a full-time job here. We have several that are locals, me not being one of them. You know, I grew up in Hood River, but we have a handful or more of officers that went to Central High School and are we've even had SROs that go to Central High School that went to school with the parents of kids that they're now, you know, getting to work with at the school level.
So you don't have any that are veterans from another agency that have come here late in their careers?
Well, we have one part-time officer. Our motorcycle officer came to us from
that's
Kaiser
right, yeah.
when he
Yeah,
retired
that's right.
from Kaiser, but he isn't included in our full-time numbers. He's very limited on hours. But no others are coming to mind.
Counselor
Thank you.
Hicks, Counselor Hicks, did you have a question? No, okay. Go ahead, Counselor.
I do real quick.
Go ahead.
As part of that cultural diversity training that you mentioned earlier, is there a implicit bias section of that?
There is, yes.
Okay.
Good. I know that there was a lot of information provided, and so counselors, if you have additional questions, or if members of the public have additional questions, please forward them to the chief or the city manager or to any of us, and we'll get it to the right people so that you can get the answers. I really do appreciate you taking the time to make the presentation this evening, Chief. I thought that was illuminating, and so I thank you for that. I'm going to take the opportunity here to roll into part of my report, which is really ties in specifically with some of the presentation that was just made. So I'm going to go right into the mayor's report right here. As you folks know, I've reported before that I'm lucky enough to work with our sister city mayor and city manager, Mr. Pessimir, and I work with both Cease and Chad over there, with Rex over at Western Oregon University, with Ben over at the Fire District, with Representative Paul Evans, and also with Western Oregon University President Rex Fuller. And we've been working together for quite some time. We gather a couple times a week to work on, originally started with issues related to COVID, and we've worked together on some other issues. But we came up with a letter that I'd like to read to you that was just put out, that talks about how we see the world here. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to just read this. Dear community member, in the past weeks, our nation and our communities have been shocked by George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis police. This tragedy was senseless and abhorrent. The deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others who have lost their lives are evidence of deep social fractures of racism that persist. We must take action to ensure that our communities adhere to the values of respect and inclusion. Any act of racism is an attack on the whole community. These types of actions are an affront to our values as a nation, state, and community. As community leaders, we state unequivocally that when any one of the communities in our nation experiences acts of hate and racism, we are compelled to come together and reaffirm our commitment to our core values and goals of inclusion, community, diversity, and respect. We are fortunate our organization, Central School District, the City of Independence, City of Monmouth, Western Oregon University, and Representative Paul Evans have an outstanding partnership. In the coming weeks, we will be organizing a forum for community leaders invited by the respective mayors to join in a dialogue to determine appropriate steps to improve relations amongst our residents. These efforts will be hosted at Western and will allow all of us to be heard. Together, we can establish priorities that will improve our overall climate. As community leaders, it is our goal to ensure everyone is welcome and is provided with an environment that empowers us to thrive. We come to you now because we know that many of us are having conversations in our homes, at our places of work, and our campuses. We want to assure you that together we are committed to creating a safer and more inclusive community. Acts of racism and discrimination have no place here. To be clear, we denounce any form of hate in our community, our nation, and the world, and we encourage you to do the same. And it's signed by Cease Kuntz, the mayor of Monmouth, Paul Evans, our state representative, Jennifer Kubista, the superintendent of the Central School District, Rex Fuller, president of Western Oregon University, and me, John McCardle, the mayor of the City of Independence. I'm proud to have been able to put my name to that, and I look forward as Mayor Kuntz and I work to create a roundtable and move some community conversations forward. And I just wanted you folks to know that, and it truly is wonderful to be working with a group of people that that embrace the same values. So I wanted to just inform you.
Mayor,
Councilor Morton, please.
to whom was that letter addressed?
That was the whole community, and that was just, it was posted, I think, by all the local governments this afternoon.
Okay, I wanted to thank you for crafting that kind of letter, because that was the depth of response that we really needed to have to this particular incident and series of incidents, in my opinion. So thank you for taking a very strong stance on that. Can we send a copy of that to the governor so it's in hand?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
We can do that.
Mayor, I second what Marilyn says. I thought it was a good letter. I thought it said exactly what it needed to say, and I appreciate the timing of it. I just have one question, and it may have just been an oversight or just a staffing issue, but is there a reason why the fire chief isn't signed off on that?
I'm not sure, but I think it's because they were focused on fire and EMS type of things, and so we have a little bit broader challenge and responsibilities, and so. But I will tell you that I'm really proud to be working with Ben Stang and that whole group that is really empowering. And I just want to say I really appreciate the support that this council gives myself and our whole community on these kind of issues. So I'm going to continue forward with my report, if that's okay with everybody. Briefly, a couple of things. As you know, I'm one of the appointed members by the governor on the Regional Solutions Advisory Committee, and we are charged with economic development for Polk, Marion, and Yamhill County, and helping apply state agency resources and sometimes dollars and cents to make things happen. The governor has indicated that we will become, for this region, the primary advisory group. Our standing is being elevated, frankly, to as we look at economic recovery. And so in the coming weeks, I'll be involved as we look to how to allocate state agency resources to help local communities and make sure economic development continues. On another front, at the Regional Solutions meeting and in some other venues, you've heard me speak before about the importance of the Highway 51 and 22, the danger there. Well, the danger became real last week. There was a fatal and a serious incident. We keep through Regional Solutions, which is a branch of the governor's office, we make sure that ODOT and others are very aware of our interests. We are working close cooperation with the county, and so we continue to push to get that intersection upgraded so we can get a flyover, and so we don't have to be having people turning in front of that. On another related matter, as many of you have read in the paper, when the federal government put out some CARES money for some of the stimulus packages, each state got a hunk, and our state got $1.6 billion available, and a significant portion of that is under the governor's ability to allocate for a number of different state agencies, and some was dictated by Congress to be used with, to be considered to be used with state and counties. The Mayors Coalition, a group of mayors from Polk, Marion, and Yamhill County have gotten together and issued a letter signed by 13 mayors, including myself and Monmouth, Dallas, Newburgh, and Salem, along with a number of other cities in the region, asking the governor to please allocate the resources as requested by the League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties to allocate those resources to cities and counties so that we can do the things necessary to support our local business and to support our community. And it was a pretty, it was a short but sharp letter, and it has gone to the governor, and I think it'll go to some other places. So I just wanted to let you know that that was happening. And many of you on that matter, the League of Oregon Cities has asked that cities put forth a to local legislators, letting them know that we think that the dollars and cents should be allocated to cities and counties to do the job that it was supposed to be. And unless there's strong objection, I would hope the council would nod their head and say yes, so we can have staff send a letter officially from council saying that that is an important, the dollars and cents are important to the community, and send them to where it's supposed to go. Is that okay with everybody? I'm seeing thumbs up and positive shake of heads, and I hear no objection. So I'm going to ask staff to help do that, and we'll work together on that. So that is what I have at this point. I'm going to take a second here before I ask Mr. Pessimir. I believe our person who wanted to make a public comment is out there. Is Mr. Wixon out in the foyer? I think I see him because he did want to make a public comment, and he did step out for a few minutes. So I did want to circle back and have him speak to us. And good evening, sir. And please step to the podium, and welcome to City Council. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Good evening.
Thank you very much for hearing me. I came to petition that the city move the street lamp in front of my driveway, which is impeding my being able to use it. I've taken a picture of it. I hope that you can see it. But this is my house at 634 Cessna Street. And this street lamp blocks my driveway that goes back to my hangar. And I request the city to move it about 2 or 3 feet to the west so I could get in and out of my driveway. And I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate you taking the time to come in and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this off to our city manager, and he's going to take a look at what the issues related to this are and visit with you specifically.
Yeah. I have brought this to the attention of the city manager so far, and he passed that to the superintendent of public works, who said that they can do nothing. So I am hoping that the city council can do something, since Pacific Power is a client of the city and the city pays for their services. So I'm requesting that the city simply ask them to move that pole a couple of feet to the west. I already looked into this.
Yeah, so Mr. Wixon has reached out to me, and Kai has been working on this and directly working with Pacific Power. I haven't heard recently what the conclusions of those comments are. I believe that pole's been there for a significant period of time. And so I think Pacific Power is having some questions about the fiscal responsibility of moving it and others. But I will happy to look into it further and figure out exactly what they're thinking, why they're thinking, and get back to you. And help interpret what their position is. So
I'm not sure how this is all going to come about, but I went through the chain of command, and now what I'm hoping is that the city council will unblock my driveway if nothing else can work.
Thank you for taking the time to come and visit with us. Mr. Pessemer will follow up as he indicated. If you could leave the picture, that would be good.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilor Morton.
could we get a follow-up on what happens with this?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you taking the time, and
Take this into consideration and unblock my driveway, and I thank you for listening.
thank you very much for taking the time to come in. And Mr. Pessemer, since you were visiting with the gentleman, Councilor Morton asked that as this progresses, if you'd follow back up with us a little later on, that would be fine. That would be good. Okay, we're going to go to the city manager report now. Mr. Pessemer, to you.
So thank you, Mayor. I do have a number of things to talk about. And first, I wanted to just speak briefly into a couple of the earlier presentations. I think that we had originally planned to try to do a presentation on some of the downtown business that council asked us for at the last meeting. This meeting has gotten really long, so we have decided to put that to the side and address a couple of more important issues. I think it was important to hear about some of the outreach efforts that we've been doing. COVID-19 has been really helpful to us getting much deeper roots into the Latino community and Ramon's efforts. And we have received a lot of questions regarding policy. We, as you can tell from listening to the chief, are really fortunate to be accredited. That is, as the mayor mentioned and the chief mentioned, not every police department does that. And the reason is because it's really hard. It takes a lot of work, a tremendous amount of detailed paperwork, as well as, some introspection that the police departments have to do in order to make sure that they're meeting the standards required to meet those accreditation goals. So it is a big deal, and it is very intensive, and that's why a lot of police departments don't have the accreditation. He also mentioned Lexipol. That is kind of the best policy manual out there. You will find a number of police departments, and I'm not going to go into any details, but those that don't use Lexipol probably have policies that are very dated and that probably don't get updated on a consistent basis. But we haven't made that investment to do that. The police department has, and it is something that is very beneficial, especially to making sure that we are current and that are doing things properly. So thanks to the chief for that presentation. So just some updates that I have. I think lot 7, I'll just continue to bring that up every council meeting. I did receive comments back from the developer yesterday. I have also received comments from our city attorney. So I will be reviewing those, and there weren't a whole lot of comments from either one. So I'm very hopeful that I'll be able to bring that back on the meeting for the 23rd. That's my goal. And so unless there's something unexpected, we would like to get that on the agenda and get that finished. I sent out to you earlier today a preliminary official statement for council's review. I just wanted to make sure that that's a big document, and really what the purpose of that document is we have talked about, and we have council has approved the refunding of bonds for Minot, and we plan on putting that out on the street on the 17th. So, and that is the official announcement that puts that out there. You don't need to look at it in great detail, but if you go through it and you see something that's a glaring error, let us know. We definitely want to make sure that it's correct. And so I just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to see it. We're moving pretty quick on this just because of the way the markets are. And so they're great rates right now. They've moved up in the last couple of days, but still great comparatively. So we definitely want to get that out there soon and make sure that we can finish that transaction. The first drive-in movies will be Thursday this week. It requires pre-registration. So if people have not pre-registered and they want to come to the movie. Unfortunately, they're going to get turned away. It's been very popular. We have 150 spots for the movie, and was sold out within an hour. So it's great to see that level of interest. We're going to try to figure out ways to get more spots in for the next movie. We want to definitely see how it went this time to make sure that we can figure out how to maximize the use of the area and to try to get more in for next week. But certainly, I think people like driving movies, and so it's good to be able to do that. And there hasn't been a whole lot of movies released recently, so good to see some old but good movies. We're also working with several local businesses and vendors. We're encouraging takeout meals before the meeting, but we're going to definitely try to make sure that the concessions are done by local businesses as well. Just a couple of other of our business development efforts. Just something we've been working on in the background through all of this is a Walk Independence brochure. We've been working with the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments on that. It's a wayfinding map focused on the downtown and historic district, and it has 2 loops, one's long and one's short. That way people can get some amenities and see some public amenity, get some exercise and see some public amenities. They did this from COG did this with a small grant from ODOT. They actually did a few cities, and that'll be released here soon. So that's something to look forward to. We have, as you probably heard, did receive a grant from Business Oregon in partnership with our application with Monmouth. And so we will be launching that as soon as we get a contract with Business Oregon and monies set aside. We had hoped for a lot more on that. We had, it was a 1-to-1 pledge and we put up $100,000. We actually only got about 22,500 of that we're going to actually be able to use. And so, and some of those loans, grant programs can be fairly large depending on the business size. So it's probably not going to go as far as we want. But there are also some strings attached, such as if you have used any other state or federal loan programs, you aren't eligible to do those. So we're probably going to be reconfiguring our loan program so that if you can't do the loan grant program, which is a matching program, you could still take out a loan that would match the same amounts or similar amounts that is in this Business Oregon grant opportunity, just to make sure that we are still trying to catch everyone. We are not going to have the same requirements as we did not in the past about if you've been participated in another program that at least on our local loan program, we don't believe that that's necessary, and we definitely want to get the monies out there and support our local businesses as much as we can. We've been asking a question about making a bulk PPE purchase to help support our local businesses. We've heard back from 12 businesses, and we're hearing that they are interested in disposable masks, Lysol spray, pump hand sanitizer, and disinfectant wipes. So we're going to try to put something together. It's not that people can't find it, it's just inconvenient for them to try to go to multiple places, and when they get there, they're out of what they needed. And so we're looking to try to use some purchasing power between us and maybe some of our partners in order to buy a fairly significant amount of that, lower the cost, and then provide it in a convenient way where people can order ahead and know they're going to get what they want and save themselves a lot of time. It's our small businesses have a hard enough time just keeping up on the things that they need to. A lot of them are understaffed because they're working themselves without staff because that's what they have to do during these times. And so certainly anything we can do to help make their lives easier, we're interested in figuring out. We have also did a while back a survey, and we never reported out on that. So this is part of kind of the downtown report, but it was more than just downtown, it was actually the entire city. So we received 40 responses, and we did ask the question about what the risk was of going out of business. And this was a few weeks ago. Low risk, 40% responded as a low risk, 25.7% responded as medium high risk, and 8% as a high risk. And so there was a group that was in between those. Those don't add up to 100, obviously, but there were definitely more in the low risk than the high risk. So that was good to hear. With that said, though, I think businesses are still trying to figure out where they sit. So we're still continuing our efforts to try to figure out what we can do and how we can help. We're mostly doing that by trying to be out there as much as we possibly can, and just talking to people and figuring out what they need. So we're still, talking about what we can do to help them, and they are still interested in loans and for forgivable loans and other types of credits. And so that is really what we've been trying to do. We're also trying to work on working on the Indie Idea Hub to find a professional consultants to help our economic development team. There are some very specific areas where businesses probably can utilize some very specific skills, whether that happens to be creating an online presence, if that is that they need to be able to allow purchases of their services or goods online and need to create a storefront online, or whether it's just a social media presentation or just other business type areas. And so we're trying to, we've actually kind of reached out. We kind of have some very specific areas where we know businesses need to, and we're trying to find a way to get those services out there, and then we'll go looking for grants later to try and fund that. But we think it's more important to try to get some assistance out there, or some specialists, so that they can go directly to them and get some services in order to help them make it through this COVID-19 crisis. So with that, that's all that I have, but I'm open to questions for me or my staff. They're kind of sitting in the virtual sidelines here. So
Questions for the
You have a
manager?
question.
Councilor Morton.
Please check in with Polk County Emergency Services. This morning, I found out at the commissioners meeting that there are thousands of pieces of PPE that they are distributing. So if you, I think they might be a good resource for getting some of that material.
sure, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, we're going to keep moving promptly forward. We have amend the Independence Development Code accessory dwellings. Mr. Evander, I think you get to carry this. I know he's out there. He is. He's starting to. You're still on mute, Fred. There you go.
Hi there. Can everybody see me?
Can't see you yet.
Okay.
There we
Hey,
now.
everybody.
We now can see you.
So nice to see everybody. So this first thing is just a continuation of your previous meeting. You'll remember we held a public hearing on the accessory dwelling units code, and you directed staff to prepare an ordinance. We went ahead and did that, and it is in your packet. I will keep it short in regards to this. Are there any questions?
For those that are watching us on TV, we spent some extensive time on this last time, and so this is the ordinance making into law what we talked about last time. I don't see anybody asking any questions or have any comments to make. Okay, council members, this is an action item.
I move to read the proposed ordinance, Council Bill 2020-05 in full as the text is contained in the council packet for the first time.
I have a motion.
Second.
Second by Councilor Ransom Smith. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? I hear no opposition. Motion carries.
An ordinance amending the Independence Development Code, subchapters 13 definitions and 74 accessory structures, and declaring an effective date.
Second motion, please. Counselor Hicks.
I move to read the proposed ordinance, Council Bill 2020-05, for the second time by title only.
I have a
Second.
motion, second by Counselor Morton. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? I hear no opposition. Motion carries.
An ordinance amending the Independence Development Code, subchapters 13 definitions and 74 accessory structures, and declaring an effective date.
And the final motion, please.
I move to adopt the proposed ordinance, Council Bill 2020-05.
Second.
Motion is second by Counselor Core. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? I hear no opposition. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
The bill has passed and will be assigned ordinance number 1579.
Okay, let's get on to Historic Preservation Code update. Mr. Evander, to you. We are opening a public hearing, and so I now declare a public hearing open. Mr. Evander, wait a minute, I have to get my script out, don't I?
Yep.
Excuse me, there's a legally required script I have to read, so people get to listen to my voice. This evening, we'll have a public hearing on legislative amendment 2018-04 to consider amendments of the Independence Development Code revisions, subchapter 59, historic preservation. The City Council will make a final decision based on the complete record, including the testimony received at tonight's public hearing. These proceedings, of course, are being recorded. This hearing will be held in accordance with the land use procedures required by the city and the state of Oregon. This is a type 4 legislative procedure. At the beginning of the public hearing tonight, staff will identify the applicable substantive criteria from the city's comprehensive plan and/or the state of Oregon statewide planning goals. For anyone wishing to speak, we're asking you to use the speaker cards that are provided. Called upon to speak, you'll be recognized. You must state your name and address for the record. Before we begin, does any counselor wish to declare an actual or a potential conflict of interest? I have to declare that I may have one that might look like I live in a national historic property, which may or may not be covered in the future by this. But since I'm part of a much larger group, I just wanted to declare that I own that kind of a house. Does anybody else have anything else they need to declare?
Yes, I should also declare that I am part owner in a property on Main Street, which falls within the historic district.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything else?
I will also say that I live in the historic district and have a non-contributing structure.
Okay. So we have now declared any potential conflicts, but everybody can still participate because there's no actuals. So I will now open the hearing on legislative amendment 2018-04 Development Code Amendment, revision of subchapter 59, historic preservation. Now, Mr. Evander, I think it's your turn.
Great, thank you. So the City of Independence has regulated historic structures. It's cared about its history for a lot of years, right? In 1980 was when the city did its first historic inventory of historic properties. So, I mean, that's 40 years ago when it started considering how to protect its history. And throughout the course of the 80s, it inventoried structures, and then right at the end of the 80s, like 1989, they designated the historic district, and they also created a board to regulate historic properties and an ordinance to regulate historic properties with. Now, the thing is that Independence has changed a lot since 1989, and amazingly, the regulations that regulate the historic district have not, right? And so it's been a priority for a number of years for the Historic Preservation Commission to update the ordinance to address some key things that they were identifying in the district. One was what they call demolition by neglect, within the code, essentially neglecting a building to such a degree that it's to the point of almost falling over. That was one thing that they identified as part of the ordinance, and that this proposed ordinance would address to a greater degree. There is also some additional things that we included in the ordinance related to where residential structures are within a commercial area and how to best sort of complement those residential structures nearby. Now, if commercial development occurred. Now I'll get into that in just a second. So what this ordinance would do is better articulate the resources that are actually regulated by the ordinance. It would clarify the various processes for historic review. Right now, coming here and looking at the ordinance and trying to administer those processes, it was unclear how I was supposed to do it under the code. It would definitely clear up a lot of that stuff. And then it would better define certain criteria for certain proposals. Like currently our code talks about complementing neighboring structures, but this would actually better spell out how you can complement neighboring structures or some of the criteria that might apply. An additional change of note that I'll just mention is it would remove things like signs from the code. Currently, we regulate signs in the historic district through this code. So every sign within the historic district that goes up has to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. What this would do is remove that. And then as part of future change, we're gonna put some standards into the sign code that talk about how signs on historic buildings might look, and various standards for that. So that is something that the Planning Commission is working on and that the Historic Preservation Commission has started working on as well. So it would remove the regulation of signs from the historic district. We have done a number of public outreach related to this. We've held a couple of a pretty extended public hearing at the Planning Commission phase. And also we went back to the Historic Preservation Commission just based on a question that the Planning Commission had. We did issue a notice to every property within the historic district about these changes. It's called a Measure 56 notice. We ran that. That was something in like February that we ran that, February 6th. So we have issued notice about this. We've been working on it quite a bit. We have received, well, it's primarily comments from one particular property owner about the changes, and his comments deal specifically with the 400 block of Main Street, South Main Street, and he's commenting specifically about something that the code will do. So what let me try and get into the weeds of just how the code works real quick to hopefully help us understand this issue, because it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a complicated issue. So the historic district, as we have it right now, has both residential and commercial properties, and it's kind of unique in that regards, right? When we designated the historic district, we didn't just designate downtown, we designated some of the surrounding residences surrounding downtown. And right now, under our current code, we regulate everything the same. So that's one of the deficiencies of the code. Recognizing that, we said, shoot, we should try and create some new standards that apply specifically to commercial areas and some new standards that apply to residential areas to actually describe how you can complement neighboring structures in both of those instances. What we realized in doing that is some of the properties within the historic district, while they have a residential character, are zoned for commercial development. Now, I want you to imagine this. Some of the properties, like Henry Hill's house, which is just catty corner of City Hall, is zoned mixed use, pedestrian friendly commercial. And that whole block right there feels residential in in nature. So imagine a house going into that block, or excuse me, imagine one of those houses getting torn down, or burnt down, or whatever might have happened to it, and then somebody going into that lot and building something that didn't look like the neighboring residential structures. What the Historic Preservation Commission felt, and the Planning Commission agreed, was we should have some sort of standards to better describe how those commercial structures that might go in that area relate to the neighboring residential structures. Just an example, so imagine that a building was destroyed. Redevelopment on that lot could go to the side lot lines, the front lot line, and it could go up to 45 feet tall, 55 with bonus height allowances under the code. The Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission felt in those instances that might not be appropriate in those areas that are characterized by residential development. So how the code addresses that is we took this map, and let's see if I can actually share my screen. Beautiful. So we took a map and we took all the areas within the historic district, and you can see the white line right here is the historic district. And we took all the areas zoned for higher intensity development within that district. And we said, some of these areas are characterized by residential development. And if somebody were to put like a multifamily structure over here, it has the potential of breaking the character of that area. So some of the places that we identified were along 3rd Street. This is a portion of single family homes. This is also along 3rd Street. This is along 2nd Street. There's a very nice historic home right here, and then a vacant lot. And then this right here is City Hall, and this is Henry Hill's house in this half block. Now, the reason I go into the weeds related to this is because the specific comment that we've received so much, that we've had so much conversation on, is this particular block right here. This particular block right here, I'll show it to you in a picture, is this half block. It's the one catty corner the other way from City Hall. It's got 3 houses on the half block, and what one individual has proposed is to come into this lot right here and develop this lot. And he's concerned that the way that the residential overlay standards are written would hinder how he's planning on doing his project. So the Planning Commission discussed it, the Historic Preservation Commission discussed it, and they both agreed that yes, this is one of the areas that the residential character of this block should be maintained, even if a commercial development occurred on the on this half block or so. The residential nature of it should be maintained, the residential character of it, I should say. And so based on that, they said, we want to keep this historic residential overlay applying to that half block. He then made a request, okay, based on that, could we potentially switch how the setback language is written? Because currently, the setback language says, if you are within this half block, you have to be set back the same distance as the neighboring structures. And he would like to pull out his building closer to the street to allow that. So based on that, the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission talked about that issue. And in both instances, it was not unanimous vote. It was a 4-2 vote in the Historic Preservation Commission. It was a 5-2 vote in the Planning Commission. I just bring that up because I know that, or I anticipate that Mr. Harris is there again tonight, and I'm trying to best explain these issues because it is kind of a complicated situation and code sort of framework that we're dealing with here. Again, the intent that we're trying to achieve with this code change, and I'll just sort of show you, is to describe how some of these commercial buildings can relate to some of the surrounding residential structures. So you can see that we talk about scale and proportion. We talk about mass. So we're describing how to best match or complement the height of neighboring structures or the appearance of the neighboring historic structures with when new development occurs in these areas. So that's the intent of this. And ultimately, what we're trying to achieve with this code. Now, based on all of that, we have looked at the criteria for code updates, and we think that this code drastically improves how historic properties are going to be managed in the City of Independence. Both the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission really like this code change. They both voted to approve this. When I look at the criteria necessary for the code change, it appears, I mean, it's clear to me that all of the code requirements are met by this change. As a result, I would recommend that you folks approve it. I would recommend that you approve it regardless of what you decide to do with Mr. Harris's issue that he will no doubt talk about. So that's my staff report. Are there any questions?
Questions for the staff?
Yeah, Fred, I have a question for you just for clarity.
Yeah.
If you could pull up the map again that shows the historic district.
Yeah, hold on one second. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about the block that is this, but there is a block south of that, which I believe is vacant land across from City Hall. Would that property there also be subject to the mass and height and scale and proportion issues?
No, it would not. And this is one of the issues that the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission really dealt with, because you will note that across the street also wouldn't be subject to those things, and also behind that half block would not. Both commissions seemed pretty aware of the anomaly of having this half block be within this overlay zone, but both felt comfortable with it, partially based on the strength of the historic structures on that half block, and also sort of the residential character of that half block. Let me just say one more quick thing. So in both instances, both the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission felt like it should remain in the overlay zone. Where they ended up splitting on their vote was whether the language for setbacks should be tweaked a little to better allow buildings to potentially go in front of the setback line that was discussed in the code. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Additional questions for Mr. Vander?
I just want to make a comment. Fred, isn't the neighbor next to that lot a member of the Historic Preservation Commission?
That is very true. Yes, she is.
Okay. Well, I don't know what we did before we had you in the city, because you seem to be cleaning up code quite a bit.
Yeah, that's
a good thing.
That's good.
Additional questions for staff?
Yeah, I have a question. So in the code, you've talked about type 2 quasi judicial review in a few spots. And that, I believe is the intent is to have the Historic Preservation Commission review those issues. But in that you refer to Independence Code subchapter 11 defining type 2 quasi judicial review.
Yeah.
But when you go to subchapter 11 in the type 2 quasi judicial review, it does not mention the Historic Preservation Commission. It only mentions the Planning Commission. And I'm wondering if that's something we need to tweak, add some language to, so that these two codes match.
Right. So originally when this code was drafted, originally I split out everything into, I put all of the type 2 provisions into that chapter. And I removed a whole bunch of the administrative stuff and just put them over in that chapter. And we have been, based on city attorney guidance, we undid that and we put everything in here. So I'm pretty certain that everything that it is the way that we need to have it to achieve the ends that we want to achieve with this.
Well, I guess I would ask maybe that you should refer to the city attorney, because to me it looks like if it says quasi, type 2 quasi judicial review in chapter 11 in subchapter 11 of the Independence Development Code, it seems like it's only the Planning Commission that does that. And,
right.
And maybe it's just adding or Historic Preservation Commission or appropriate commission or whatever the language maybe should be.
Right. Okay, well, we can, this thing has been going for so long, I can't remember how exactly it got like that, but let me look into that and I can definitely consider that.
And I don't think that has any bearing really. I think the code, the historic, this chapter 59 that we're talking about tonight, I think is fine. But that might be another issue we need to look at.
Right.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Vander? Okay, we're now going to go to public testimony. And we have two people, well, we have three people who have signed up. Mr. Brad Harris and Gordon King. I'm going to ask them to come in at this point. And I think they're out in the entryway. Oh, there you go. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Your Honor, City Council, City Manager, staff. My name is Gordon King. I reside at 5166 Cobb Lane in Salem, Oregon. And I'm here to talk about the property that Fred brought up this evening concerning the proposed historic residential overlay. And I'll tell you, 20 years. 20 years seems to go by so fast, but 20 years ago, the City of Independence was putting together a plan. And I think at that time, if they would have said, Gordon, we'd like you to be involved with this. We're building a great community here in Independence. Your task is going to be developing a downtown core. I think what I would want to do right out of the gate was probably talk you guys into giving me the best piece of land to develop that core. It would include the riverfront to, let's say, second, maybe third, as much as I can get. I would want at least from A Street to maybe E Street, F Street. And I would want that to be developed as my downtown core. I would want the improvements in this area to be something, and I'm going to quote from your own vision plan, the community members will be proud of its beautiful parks, buildings, its multicultural heritage, and its commitment to be accessible to all people. And that covers so much territory and so much of what you want your downtown to be. But I think I would want to develop exactly along the lines the City of Independence did. They called it, and I think I'd call it, the Vision 2020 plan. 20 years, a long time it seems like, but boy, does it go quick. We would develop zoning and design guidelines to reflect current situations, current buildings, current heritage that we have in downtown Independence right now. So one of the things I'm bringing up this all to say that the Vision 2020 plan identifies goals for the downtown overlay area. And they specifically include, and I won't read all of this, but they want, number one, to enhance historic growth. They want to develop a vibrant downtown community. And we want to create an accessible community. Want to focus on youth, I am reading all this, improve and promote community assets. So the property located at 478 South Main Street is located in several jurisdictional areas. One is the downtown overlay. Another layer is the MUPC, the mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial zone. And both of those zones, as we've put together the 2020 plan, has a lot of guidelines. They have design guidelines, they have review guidelines, they tell us how we can build our building, where we can build our building, how it has to affect the neighboring properties. I believe that the intent of that MUPC zone, if we go back to 2000, is to help develop the Main Street corridor that has, again, that enhances the historic growth, and it develops a vibrant downtown community that you can walk to shop, all the way from really the City Hall to A Street, to the riverfront, to your amphitheaters that have been developed. One of the greatest things about the City of Independence and your Vision 2020 plan that's sort of unlike a lot of cities that we work with is that you guys actually do your plan. You actually have action plans. I've read this a lot and can't believe you've done all of these things. City Hall, getting rid of the gravel, building a hotel down by the riverfront, enhancing the riverfront, building sports complexes. And so I believe that the intent of that MUPC was to make Main Street sort of the historic looking downtown core that's accessible to all the citizens of Independence. And frankly, I live in Salem. We come over to the downtown Independence core a lot. Great restaurants, lots of activity. Used to be the fireworks all the time. Brought our kids over, the amphitheater, the outside farm, and can't remember the fair that you have downtown in the old days. In fact, we had lunch down at the Italian restaurant today because it's finally open. Wonderful food. But I bring all of that up to say that we support absolutely what Independence is about, what the historic overlay represents, and what we have a problem with is the historic residential overlay. And we think that we can accomplish a lot of our development and proposals through a review process with the city under the current structure that it has now without having the historical residential overlay on this particular property. Main Street, again, this property is on Main Street and it's not 2 blocks off of Main Street, but it's on Main Street. So if you can imagine that development connecting to all the way up to A Street, that's what we see. So that's all I have to talk about. What we're hoping is that this draft or this proposal for the historic residential overlay can at least be exclude the property that we are working on Main Street. Thank you.
Before we go to questions, I do want to acknowledge that Brad Harris, who's also involved with this, he's here. He didn't say he doesn't need to speak, but he'll respond to questions if there's anything from council. But I wanted to just acknowledge that he was here in the room and filled out a speaker card. Are there any questions from councilor for the speakers? Councilor Ransom Smith.
Do I need to clear any kind of a conflict? I think Brad's there for investment properties. I'm related to Brad.
Just a moment. And first of all, Jason, can we get sound in here so the speakers can hear us? And okay, we're figuring out something here. Okay. Okay. And
young people.
And I'm unaware of anything that Brad has going on. I just wanted to, he's married to my cousin. So I just want to put that out there.
I just wanted you to, did you hear that? Councilor Ransom Smith says that you're married to her cousin. Okay. And I just wanted to, that just had additional
just
questions.
making sure it's not a conflict.
There you go. It is
Yes,
not.
I have a question.
Councilor Morton.
I can't picture it in my mind right now. Can you give me some landmarks that would refer me to the exact property that's being discussed?
I would tell you that there's 5 residences, maybe 6 residences in downtown. So there's, let's say if you were going north, on the right-hand side would be a derelict building, and across the street from that is the property we're talking about. Does that orient you?
I can help.
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Uh-oh, what am I doing here? So it's this one right here. So if City Hall is right there, and
right,
it's this house right here.
Okay, thank you.
And this half block or so right here.
One we're talking about?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Come again, Karen?
I think it's also the empty lot next to it.
Oh, there's
Yeah, there's that whole half of that.
whole half of that lot. Okay. Additional questions for our speakers? Does anybody else have additional questions? I don't see any flags or any voices. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Our next speaker is Jennifer Flores. I'll invite her to join us. Good evening and welcome. You can use you're right at the podium and move things as you need to, however. There you go. And you can pull your mask down. It's okay. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to council.
Hi. Okay, so my name is Jennifer Flores. I live at 434 South Main Street, which is the house immediately next door to the lot that Mr. Harris and Mr. King are talking about that they have bought and they hope to develop. So in the pictures that Mr. Vander was showing you, my house is blue, but it's now painted green. Now, maybe that'll help you guys get a picture of it in your head. I'm both a member of the Historic Preservation Committee and a citizen of Independence. I tell you this for more than one reason. I believe in full transparency at all times, sometimes to my own detriment. The home next door to the property that was discussed when Mr. Harris asked for considerations to the historic code is mine. As a committee, we were given options. They were discussed and voted upon, and in front of you sits the winning vote, which I believe, I have it right there. It says keep the half block in the historic residential overlay zone and make no changes to the code. That's what won in both the planning and the historic Preservation Committee because they're only asking for changes to the half block that they purchased. But there was another option that I was more comfortable with, and I'll get to that later. I wasn't here when the city developed the current plan, the Vision 2020, but I'm here now, and I believe that I should have a say in things that will affect my life in Independence and my home. And more importantly, I think that my concerns should be seriously considered by the people that we vote to have it listen to us. Mr. Harris asked for, and I agreed with a clause allowing some latitude in regards to setbacks on the block in question, which is something that sounds like Mr. King said differently. So there may be some confusion, but I haven't spoken with Mr. King, just Mr. Harris. He plans on building a mixed-use commercial building with apartment units above. I hate this, but again, I wasn't here when someone decided it was a good idea to extend Main Street businesses past D Street. So while I'm stuck with the MUPC overlay that's on my block, I can still speak up about this. He will have to adhere with option 3 to historical construction and make the building look like it fits on the block. Bonus, not a hideous Lego building. He's asking for the ability to not have it set back 30 feet because he wants to put tenant parking on the back side of the building so it has less of an impact on Main Street parking. Bonus, Gilgamesh is already affecting Main Street parking in front of my home. The last thing we need now is to add even more traffic on the road, not to mention that if bigger vehicles park abutting my driveway, which sits on Main Street, it impedes my view to safely exit my driveway. There has already been a motor vehicle accident involving my daughter when a large truck was parked in front of my house and she could not see past it to see the Miata flying down Main, because very few people actually go 20 miles an hour down Main Street. It totaled her car. Thank God she was safe. Perhaps Independence Plan didn't take into account the people who made home on Main Street 20 years ago, but you need to understand that the people who are making home here today intend to stay. So if I'm going to be forced to live in a multi-use pedestrian-friendly commercial zone, as well as the downtown overlay, as well as the historic overlay, because all 3 of those overlays are on that single block, which I know more about zoning now than I thought I would ever know in my life, because I'm a caregiver. That's who I am. I don't zones. But I think having learned those things and living on that block, I should have a say in what happens on that block. I have no problem with option 3, which gave him some latitude on setbacks. I think it'd be absolutely silly. And I think even across the street from City Hall, where plans for a giant care facility, which will also impact parking and go out to the sidewalk. I think those things are silly on these streets because you're now past downtown area. Downtown ends at D Street. And for whatever reason, 20 years ago, the plan was to extend it. I wasn't here, I can't speak on that. I have no problem with a 15, 20-foot setback so that Mr. Harris can put his parking in the back, as long as what goes in looks like it belongs in the historic district, which he would be required to adhere to if he was given the only provision allowing for change in setback requirements, but not allowing for building materials or design changes. Maybe this can be a one-time exception. Maybe it can be a case-by-case basis. I don't know. That's, again, zoning above my pay grade. But I can tell you, Monmouth used to have a beautiful, large, old house that faced its Main Street on just Independence's side of 99. It sold, got torn down, and up went plain, ugly, boring townhouses. I do not want that next to my house. My house is beautiful, and the house to the north of my house is beautiful. And what goes to the south of my house should also be beautiful, not Lego buildings. That's it.
Thank you. Counselors, do you have any questions for this speaker? Do I see any? I don't see any hands or flags. Thank you very much for taking the time to come in. I did appreciate, we all appreciate you taking the time and providing information. Thank you so much. Okay. One of the previous speakers is asking a question to be able to ask Fred a question. Does anybody object to Mr. Harris asking Fred a question? I don't see any objection. Please step forward.
Thank you, guys. Hey, Fred. I was just gonna see, we've talked a lot about building design, you and I. And, if we're in this overlay, we're gonna have to follow the residential building code. And so I had all kinds of questions about that. And we've talked pretty extensively about the way that we could still design a commercial mixed use building there. And I know in that proposed code, you guys have the images explaining scale and mass. And I think those, those are at a first glance, they're a little bit misleading. And I've kind of realized that we still will be able to do development on the property under that residential overlay. And so I was hoping Fred could kind of explain how, kind of like what Fred and I have already talked about, how we could still do what we're looking to do in that, so you guys understand what our concern is with the setback. We still would have commercial use in that building and have tenants, and we'd like those tenants to still be able to have, like direct access to the sidewalks and such. And then we're also going to need the parking that we can to accommodate all those tenants. And we'd prefer not to have them using side streets. And I think there is a lot of impact even under the overlay. There's still a lot of things to consider. And I think that those structures that are there now, they have, I think we're around 28 feet setback, where a typical residential structure even is 15. And then if you look at the code, all the underlying code that we're in, we're looking at like 0 to 10, but on Main Street it's 0. So, we're not really wanting to be at 0 because there are those structures there, but there's also talks about, there's also code language that talks about how you can jog that structure back, or all kinds of different things to make it fit. So I was just hoping you could elaborate for them on that.
Yeah, so it's funny because when I originally wrote the setback language, I was anticipating the other way. It's funny, I was thinking towards a street because I was thinking there's certain situations where someone would feel inclined to set a structure further back than the neighboring structures. And I was thinking, oh, it makes sense to be able to set it closer to the street if everything else on the street was set at that setback. And that's really when I wrote that, that's what I was really anticipating. I wasn't anticipating the situation where you would have, those buildings, I'll just show you them one more time, just so we can all get the image here. These buildings right here are set back very far from the street. You can see that right there. Those buildings are set back very far from the street, and indeed, they're probably set back further than even a required residential setback. So a residential setback is 15 feet. Our biggest residential setback is 15 feet. In the downtown overlay, or in the downtown zone, the mixed use pedestrian friendly zone, that build to line is like at 0, right? So there's no setback. and within the downtown, we anticipate that buildings are going to be set at the front property line. So really, how that setback gets drawn has a big impact on how his project's going to work, because it is going to push everything back on the lot. Is that what you wanted me to explain?
Yeah, so that, the setback, and then, but then also the scale and mass, you know, because we talked about, we definitely can still do a
Right.
building the same scale. It's just gonna have to be broken up to look residential and follow those different residential design standards.
Right. So let me just show that here real quick. So, so this is not saying per se that you cannot have a larger scale building. In fact, it says if a proposal involves multiple parcels, you have to include things like development articulation to break up, I'm sorry about that, to break up the building so it appears to be more sort of residential structures, where it's not just one gigantic building, right? That's really what that is saying there. So it has to include development articulation. It also talks about if you have, whoops, that was a mistake. Oh, uh-oh, now I'm just hitting it. Let me, if you, let me find it, like height too. So here we go. So if where a larger structure is proposed adjacent to a historic single-family home, the structure is stepped down to the height of the neighboring home. So you can see that right there within it. So that explains that you can have a taller structure still, but you have to consider the height of your neighboring structure, and you have to like have it taller on one side and sort of step it down to so it would better complement the adjacent structure. Now, the reason for this is because our code has similar language right now, but the language is you need to complement the setback of your neighboring structure. You need to complement the height of your neighboring structure. And it's very difficult to actually say, okay, what does that mean? How do you actually get to something that does that? So what that language is trying to do is trying to show through things like pictures and words, trying to describe what the existing standards mean in a little better way.
Right. So I just, you know, I think I want everybody to picture kind of a building that has, you know, it has commercial use on the main floor. So you have people coming in and out of the front. And, you know, I think everybody can probably see why we want people to have closer access to the sidewalks. We want it to be part of we still want it to be part of the main street. But then also just that parking, consider the parking too, because the more parking spaces we can fit behind the building, the less we affect the parking in the neighborhoods. We only have to, by the code, even if it's in the overlay and everything, we still only have to have one parking space per residential unit, and there's still no requirements for parking for the commercial units. So if we have, you know, if we have a dozen residential units and then we have another 4 or 6, you know, commercial units there, we only have to have 12 parking spaces, but we'd really like to, and we can accommodate that the way it is, but we'd really like to have more than that. We'd really like to be able, for all of our people visiting, all of, you know, all of the tenants and their extra car or whatever, to actually have parking rather than having to park out on the side streets, park up, you know, out on the street. So I think it's, you know, we're gonna work with whatever code we have, but I think it's just really important to consider the effect that that's gonna have on the downtown. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if, you know, if we do have to be in that residential overlay, I think the standards really need to be looked at there. I don't think it makes sense because it is probably going to end up being a commercial development. I don't think it makes sense for anybody to have that building set 28 feet back from Main Street. So.
Answer, and you got a little testimony in there too.
All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Okay. Is there anybody else? I don't see anybody else for testimony. Do counselors have any further questions at this point? Without objection, I'm going to close the hearing, and then we'll talk about it and see what we want to do. And so I'm officially closing the hearing. Okay. What do you think? What are your comments? What are your thinkings? Because we got into a lot of detailed weeds there.
May I speak? I have
Please,
a
go
question
ahead.
actually for Fred. Maybe you should have been, asked before we close the hearing. But you referred to the present code and said that a lot of the requirements are in there right now. They're just not particularly clear, and that the new code just clarifies it and makes it, a little more workable. So, I mean, is it safe to say that it doesn't really make that much difference whether we pass this code tonight as far as this property goes? It's still going to be an issue that needs to be resolved?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, essentially the tension that Mr. Harris is expressing between the downtown standards and the historic preservation standards, they exist right now, right? I mean, this tension is built into the code. And what this code is trying to do is trying to better clarify how we actually navigate through the tension, where it's saying, in some of these areas, we anticipate new development to be residential in nature, and this is how to do that. Now, yeah.
Okay.
So the tension is going to stay there. Yeah.
Yes.
So if we approve this, the way it's presented, that would mean that, okay, we modify the code. And that would leave the rules with the extended, any development would have to be parallel to the existing properties, have to be about the same height, size, mass. And the intent is that it be complementary to the properties next door. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is exactly right, Mayor, but it does not say that it has to be the same height and same mass. What you can do is you can have bigger structures, but it would be broken down or articulated in such a way to make it appear like smaller structures, right? To give the appearance that this isn't one just monolithic building. It's broken up in such a way to complement the neighboring residential structures.
And then follow up, let me make sure I understand that any development that's going to happen there, the construction standards, the view, the look would be, again, complementary, so that it would look historic-like to the people next door. It wouldn't be something ugly and icky.
Yeah, that's the hope. Like, I mean, it's always tough to, I mean, you try and get to how a building's going to look in regulation, but I mean, it's always tough. So, I mean, this is trying to address key issues like how a building fits with its neighbors, right? Yeah. The ultimate worst, I mean, one of the worst things I think is when you got a very nice small scale historic house and then you've got a very big house right next to it, or a very big commercial building that dwarfs the scale of the neighboring structure and all of that stuff. This is what this code is trying to address.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Other people's thoughts and or comments? Anybody want to make any thoughts or comments?
Oh,
Or if somebody wants to suggest action, I mean, we can, whichever way you'd like to go.
I'd like to make a comment.
Please do.
It seems like we've had the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission look at this issue, and they both, gave us their recommendations. And I think there are some ways that we can work with the builder and still get the developed that is somewhat satisfactory to everybody, even with this new code that we're looking to approve. So I think we should go ahead and approve it.
Did you want, so there are two things here. First would be the approach, the option A, to accept the findings. If someone, did you want to make that motion? I'm not, oh, excuse me, Karen.
Also, Mr. Mayor and councilors.
oh,
Yes.
yeah, muted, and then are you?
You're,
unmuted and
you're,
then-
you're still, are you muted?
Yeah.
Karen, I think Karen's still muted. Are you, okay, she's unmuted, go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, just that I did send out a further revision to this proposed code via email regarding historic trees. And that is to be, I wanted to bring that up to be a part of the record. So that way that is included with this proposed legislation. I have a copy of it right here.
Okay. So I think we're to Counselor Takis.
Yeah, so then my question is, okay, first of all, we need to approve or adopt the findings. Does that update that you sent, Karen, does that need to be included in the findings?
She said it does not.
Okay, so I move to approve LA 2018-04 and adopt the findings and conclusions in the attached staff report.
Okay, I have a motion,
Second.
a second by Martin Willis. Is there
Can I-
discussion? Please
Yeah,
do.
can I ask a quick question, Fred? What's the parking situation again?
So the parking situation would not be changed by this code at all. How Mr. Harris was bringing that in was he was making the argument that by pushing his building back, he would have less room for parking in the back of his building, right? If he's having to step back the building that far, there's less room for parking behind the building. So that was the argument that he's making. In downtown right now, we do not require for commercial businesses. We simply require parking for every residential unit in downtown.
That's my biggest concern is we're already maxed out on parking downtown. And with all the townhomes going in, I mean, granted, there's going to be parking for the townhomes, but there's going to be some overflow onto Main Street. There's got to be. And it just really concerns me.
Additional comments? Anybody else have additional comments? Counselor
I
Ransom
just-
Smith.
Out of an abundance of caution, since we are adding the historical tree, I just want to be completely transparent that Mr. Evander and I have been working with my parents on getting a historical tree removed. And I just want to add that it looks like the changes don't apply to their reasoning, so it shouldn't be an issue, but out
Thank
of
you.
an abundance of transparency.
Okay, thank you very
And
much.
point of order, we're just looking at the adopting the findings at the moment, aren't we?
We're only adopting the findings because okay. So I have a motion and I have a second. I don't see anybody else want to say anything. Okay. Counselor, okay, all in favor of the motion to approve the findings and conclusions signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed.
No.
And I'm sorry, is that Counselor Core? Counselor Core, okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Did you get that, Karen? Thank you. Okay, I have a procedural question here. The motion passes, by the way. Fred, you mentioned that you might need to take a look on how some wording was in the ordinance. Would that be appropriate to, since we've adopted findings, for you to go back and check on that one item that Councilor Takis brought earlier and move on and before we do the ordinance?
So I looked at it, and how it's worded is it refers to the fact that we are going to process it like a type 2 procedure, but this code right here makes it clear that the Historic Preservation Commission is going to be the ones administering that type 2 process.
So there is no need for any change?
I don't believe so. I mean, our attorney was well versed in all of these changes.
Okay.
She's seen this thing a number of times.
Okay, so we will move on to the.
If I may,
please.
I would just. He's probably right. I would say let's go ahead and pass the ordinance or the code change, and have him make a phone call to the attorney.
So I'm unclear. So you want him to make the phone call first, and then we do the ordinance, or do you want to do the?
No, I think the ordinance.
Oh, okay, I see. What
code change that we're making is fine. Just make a phone call about the
process
development code. You know what I'm talking about, Fred.
Okay. So, all right. So we can go to the ordinance motion if someone would care to. If someone would like to make motions.
Well, I move to read the proposed ordinance Council Bill 2020-06 in full as the text is contained in the council packet for the first time.
Okay.
Oh, and I'd like to include the changes in the supplemental letter that was sent to us on tree planting.
Tree planting. Okay, so I have a motion.
Karen?
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Martin Willis. Is there discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? Hearing no dissent, all motion carries. Okay, Karen's getting that out.
An ordinance amending the Independence Development Code, repealing and replacing subchapter 59, historic preservation, and declaring an effective date.
Second motion, please.
I move to read the proposed ordinance, Council Bill number 2020-06 for the second time by title only.
Motion, second by Councilor Morton. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? Hearing no opposition, motion carries.
An ordinance amending the Independence Development Code, repealing and replacing subchapter 59, historic preservation, and declaring an effective date.
Final motion, please.
I move to adopt the proposed ordinance, Council Bill 2020-06.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? No opposition, the motion carries. Thank you very much.
The bill has passed and will be assigned ordinance number 1580.
Thank
Okay.
you, very much, councilors.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move forward to the Dallas Independence Monmouth Enterprise Zone. Mr. Irvine, I think this is to you. I think there he is. Mr.
All
Irvine,
right.
to you.
Thank you. So I think, I tried to be pretty thorough in my staff report, so I'll keep my presentation here, but enterprise zones are actually a federal designation that's run through the state. They're an incentive for essentially, for the recruitment and expansion of typically kind of larger traded sector industry, job creation, businesses. The Dallas Independence Monmouth Polk County zone is a shared zone between those four governments. This is actually the second time that we have come to you all to re-up it. It's I think a good kind of good example of collaboration between our governments to be able to kind of jointly sponsor and manage this this incentive program. I think I mentioned in the staff report that it's only really been used in Independence and actually in Polk County as a whole a handful of times. Most visibly and most recently was the FCR call center contact center that went into Central Plaza. And then Medallion Cabinetry, which is now ACPI, was another good example of that. But I think the key point with this enterprise zone is it's a property tax exemption for 3 to 5 years on the capital improvements. And this is kind of it's for better or worse, it's going to become your ticket in the door for large industrial projects like this. They tend to, when they're looking around, they tend to be, that's one of the criteria they look for. So it's kind of a way for us to be in the game. And it is a long-term benefit. You do give up, 3 to 5 years worth of property taxes. You get the job creation, the wages, the bump to your local economy. And at the same time, examples of FCR and Medallion Cabinetry, they're still here. So they have been paying taxes and continuing to contribute to the local economy for quite some time after the incentives have expired. So this is every 10 years we need to renew this loan. And so that's what we're coming to you for tonight. Each participating government has to. Monmouth approved theirs a couple days ago. I believe Dallas is considering theirs, actually, if not tonight, then this week. And we'll be going to Polk County after that. We did have a required consultation with the taxing districts, and that went well. And I think that's going to sum up my answer any questions you have about it.
Questions for Mr. Irvine? I hear no questions.
I am very much in favor of an enterprise zone like this. We have seen success with it in the past. Is there any way we could change the name of it? It's awful to be called the DIM district.
Yeah, unfortunately, I guess that's just the way it got done.
But you can help by making a motion.
I would move to adopt resolution 20-1530, requesting designation of Dallas Independence Monmouth Enterprise Zone 3.
I have a motion.
Second.
Second by Martin Willis. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? I hear no opposition. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We're going to move forward into budget, the budget adoption. And we have several budget related things that we're going to do here. And so I'm looking at our city recorder. Do I open the public hearing for comment first and then go? Mr. Pestamere, you or Ms. Butch, did you want to make any comments related to the budget adoption?
I think Gloria was going to make just a few brief comments. So,
Ms. Butch, good evening.
Yes, good evening. I just wanted to, in addition to the staff memo, I wanted to share a bit of really good news that we received today. With our the refunding that we were working on for those MINET issues, we went through a rating review with Standard & Poor's, and we received a upgrade on our rate from A- to an A, which is really good news. This will help us to get a better cost rate from the bond insurers. And something that I wanted to point out in part of this rate review, that they looked at this budget that you have before you tonight, and they were pleased with how we would have responded in our budget and our plans to the pandemic, and how we've adjusted that way. So I just wanted to share that.
Great. For those of you who are watching, I want to let you know that the full budget committee and the council have taken a look at this over quite some period of time. And so the fact that we are moving promptly through this does not mean we have not taken considerable time and energy looking at this. So I just want everybody to just be aware that there's been many nights that the group gathered and looked and did an awful lot of reading. If someone, this is an action item, and if there aren't no questions, this is an action item, please.
Mayor, did you open up a public hearing?
You're absolutely right. Thank you. Is there anybody out there who wants to make a public comment related to the budget? And also if anybody wants to make a comment about accepting state revenue sharing. I see no one, and so without objection, I'm going to close the public hearing. Thank you, staff, for making sure that I said all the right things. So page 110, folks. If someone would like to suggest action, please.
I can take on that first one.
Please
I
do.
move to approve resolution number 20-1531, a resolution adopting the City of Independence budget for fiscal year 2020-21 in the sum of $32,285,769, to approve appropriations in the amount of $31,870,835, to impose the ad valorem property taxes for 2020-21 at the rate of 4.5897 per thousand of assessed value for the permanent rate, and then the amount of $417,765 for debt service of the general obligation bonds, and to categorize the taxes.
Okay, that's motion number one.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion on that? I hear no discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? I hear no opposition. The motion carries. Let's go on to the next resolution, please. This is the one that says we can take state money.
I move to approve resolution number 20-1532, a resolution to elect to receive state revenues for fiscal year 2020-21.
I have a motion.
Second.
Second.
A second by Councilor Kaur. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We're going to move on to the supplemental budget and amendments.
So I have nothing to add to this. If you have any questions from my memo, I'm happy to help out with answers to those.
And again, for the public, we've already discussed these items. And so if someone would like to make a motion.
Yes,
Go ahead,
move-
Meryl.
Thank you. I move to adopt resolution 20-1533, a resolution adopting and appropriating funds for the supplemental budget for fiscal year 2019-2020.
Have a motion.
Second.
Second by Councilor Takis. Is there discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? I hear no opposition. Motion carries. Moving forward, we're going to go down to the city manager authority in declaring an emergency. Excuse me? Which one? Excuse me, my error. We need to do the next one, 1534, of authorizing budget amendments.
I move to
Go ahead, please.
approve resolution number 20-1534 until all have been approved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion, second, discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, now we can go to the city manager authority for declaring an emergency. Mr. Pessimir?
So thank you, Mayor. So this legislation is a result of the conversations that we've been having over the past few councils regarding emergencies and just what is in the standard emergency declaration in our code versus some of the things that we found with this particular emergency. May be better to be a little bit more flexible. So primarily the issues were surrounding the ability to respond quickly to grants and other financial opportunities or programs out there, and make sure that the city manager had the authority to act on council's behalf to do that. And if you take a look at the resolution on page 177 of 179, it designates the city authority for that. That is really just saying what the city has the authority to do, just to make it crystal clear that that's what the city is declaring is our responsibility, and not leaving that to the state or the county. And then under section 3, it delegates the city manager to authorize and implement that authority. So there are some other things that that the city attorney added. So I just wanted to point those out so that that nothing gets by you. And obviously, if you guys have any questions or comments or want to see something different, please let us know. This isn't an attempt to do anything, but it's just to clear things up. But I think I mentioned in the past that really the code gives the city manager only the authority to modify rules or orders. And we don't really use a lot of rules and orders in our management of, I feel the same way, of our government. So it kind of expands that out a little bit to talk about enforcement and the policies, the collection of associated fees, and emergency mandated closures. We've had to do some of that already, just to, as you know, we've waived fees, and we have also not been doing shutoffs of water, although we probably will pick that up again in July, and some other things. And so there's policies and things that we've had to do in order to make that in place. It also makes clear that I have the ability to change policy related to employment issues. Obviously, we've kept those to a minimum, but we've had to certainly put some temporary policies in place in order to keep our workers safe, keep the public safe as well. So really, this is mostly just to clean up. I think the last thing is take actions and issues and orders necessary and reasonable to protect health, safety, and welfare of the city and the public, and conduct activities that minimize or mitigate the effects of the emergency, as long as such actions, orders, and activities are in compliance with city, state, and federal law. So our city attorneys actually work with a lot of jurisdictions on these. They have standard emergency declarations. A lot of this language comes from there. I think probably post-emergency, we'll probably want to go back and revisit our code and make sure that it's updated. It's probably a little bit out of date, and I think that just does that. So if you don't have any questions, that's essentially the legislation put before you.
I would like to see a termination date, but I don't think a month is reasonable. I don't want to keep looking at this thing over and over again.
So I think section, are you looking at section 4?
I'm actually looking at the memo, the discussion portion of the memo, where it talks about council may opt to state a date for termination.
Yeah, so that was in the memo. That was something that the attorney suggested we throw out there for your consideration. That is not what the actual legislation says. Legislation says it can be, shall remain in effect until termination by the city's declared state of emergency, unless further extended by the city manager or their designee or the city council. So it certainly could extend past that.
Discussion though, separate action at this point. Okay. If we're okay with what we have in front of us, is that okay with everybody? Counselor Hicks,
Oh, sure, I can move. I move to adopt resolution 20-1535, delegating additional authority to the city manager pursuant to declared state of emergency.
motion,
Second.
second by Ransom Smith. Discussion. Cleaning this all up. Let's hope we never have to use it again. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed. And with no opposition, the motion carries. What I'd like to do is save council announcements, and we'll just tack those on at the end of the urban renewal meeting unless anybody objects to that. Is that okay? So I'm going to, without objection, I'm going to adjourn the city meeting and call to order the urban renewal meeting. And let the record show that all the urban renewal members are here. You have minutes from the January 28th meeting. Do they meet with your approval?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed. Thank you very much. We're going to move, unless there's objection, we're going to move directly to the budget adoption because that's the primary action on for this. And Ms. Butch, did you want to add anything to, did you have anything to add here? Oh, excuse, yeah, I have to open a public hearing and then allow the, Ms. Butch, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I have nothing to add to this one. It's just as the budget committee, so you've seen it a couple times already.
Just, yes. Okay. Since this is a public hearing, is there anybody out there that has anything to say about the urban renewal budget? I don't think there's anybody out there that's flagging to get in. We're checking. I don't believe so. No? Okay. Without objection, I'm going to close the public hearing for the urban renewal budget. And this is an action item. And to remind everybody, this did go through the budget committee with extensive conversation. If someone would like to.
I move to approve resolution number 2020-01, a resolution adopting the Independence Urban Renewal District budget for fiscal year 2020-21 in the sum of $1,286,524 to approve appropriations in the amount of $1,286,524 and to declare and certify the maximum tax increment that may be raised.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? I hear no further discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed. I hear no opposition. The motion carries. That is all the business that, wait a minute. Did I cover everything here? Yes, I did.
I believe so.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a plethora of paper in front of me today, and I'm just trying to make sure I get all of that. Did anybody have any general announcements that they wanted to make that?
I just wanted to ask Tom, Tom, when the chief gets that PowerPoint presentation posted, could somebody send out an email and let us know that?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Great.
I would just like to say congratulations to all of our 2020 graduates, Central High Schools, surrounding other private schools and our local community colleges. Jobs well done. I know that graduation was not what many of them had long dreamt of, but the community really kind of rallied up and did parades and lots of great photo ops for them. So congratulations, grads, and wishes for the best and brightest futures possible.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other announcements that need to be made at this time?
Jason just texted me that it's already posted on the website.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. If anybody's hungry If somebody says adjourn, we can adjourn and then go home and have dinner.
Move to adjourn, sir.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And without opposition, motion carries. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you for your service.
You
Have a
too.
pleasant
Thank
evening,
you.
folks.
Thank you.